So right near the beginning of this chapter, last week, remember we talked about failure? This week we get to talk about success, but he starts it off with a very interesting phrase. He says, success, the dark road we fear. Isn't that an interesting way to think of success? Because we all think it's something we want to embrace, that we eagerly run after. But his point is, of course, we fear it because it means we have to change something about us. It means we have to do something different. It means we have to think and act not according to the rules we've learned at some point or another. So throughout this class, because you're almost perfect in all this anti-racism thing now, throughout this class, what are the things you've learned that have helped you to achieve that anti-racism perfection? What are some of the things that when we started, you weren't even looking down that road, but now you go, I'm there, I'm looking at that, I'm working on that. What success, I guess, is what I'm saying.
For me, I think that he talked about his parents, who probably are about my age, and their involvement in the Black Power movement. And I am kind of caught in a time warp, I guess. And the way that he views the world is very different from the way his parents view the world. But he does acknowledge the changes that he's gone through. And the book was a relief for me because I am still very disturbed by white fragility. It just really pisses me off that all white people are racist. That just really bothers me. And I don't see it as being I can't imagine talking to a Trump supporter and saying, well, you're white, so you're racist. I can just imagine how that conversation would go. So he disagrees with the racism class that we had at the Unitarian Church, and also with a lot of discussions I've had with Diane, because he says that people of color can be racist, which is what I've always said, because as a real estate agent, I worked with everybody. I really liked working with people of color and people of different ethnicities. That was a whole lot more interesting and fulfilling usually than working with rich white people. And I'll never forget the time that I was showing people homes down in the South Side, and the woman spoke no English and turned to her husband in Spanish, said that there were, that she liked the neighborhood because there were no negros in the neighborhood. And I stopped the car and said, Martha, you wouldn't want to live next door to me? So, this idea that these other people have, that people of color can't be racist, doesn't sit very well with me. Mm-hmm. And he acknowledges his racism, and he says that racism is endemic, that everyone is guilty of racism, which is what I've always thought.
He does put a spin on it, though, John, that I want you to be sure you hear. It's that the racism that we carry is that which perpetuates systems of repression within our world. It's not just, I hate you because you're black or white or brown. It's where I support and continue to help systems of repression.
Right, and he talks about that when he talks about his hatred for white people for a while and his anger. And I completely understand that. And I've been exposed to that in my life. And it's hard because when you're the person that's the target of that, it's really easy to slip. I have a friend that was in Detroit during the riots and got beat up badly. And as a result of that is, in my opinion, a stone cold racist. I was beaten and did not feel that way. I felt the opposite. I felt that I had failed and that and it made me sad.
Yeah.
So,
well, and one of the big things he has about success, John, is what do we do that helps one of those reactions to happen rather than the other?
right.
How do we help that other person to move towards a better world rather than the opposite?
I think the biggest thing that I got out of it was my mother was a social worker. At her funeral, they talked about how she was fought against racism all of her life, but my mother was an assimilist, and I really have to be careful about that. We would go as a kid into the ghetto in Baltimore and paint people's homes and stuff. And
wonderful acts of mercy.
well, but I was taught as a kid that you helped people in the ghetto by teaching them how to be white.
Yeah, right.
And my mother, God bless her, I think would have really struggled with what there's with the way that that's changed. And I think that a lot of people that are racist are assimilists, and so they don't. So their racism is hidden because they think they're good people and they think that they're helping, when all that they're really doing is enabling racism.
Right. But that I think is a lot of his point. And he's especially trying to make it as a younger generation talking to you old people.
Right.
Okay. He is trying to say that part of what you were taught and part of how you negotiated well through the racism of the past is going to be harder for you to negotiate. It's going to make it harder for you to negotiate through this space, because this space is calling for something different. And so he's asking us to step into a new vision of. So let me ask everyone else, how is it that that you've had success in this? What is it that's helped you get better? Go ahead.
You and I have debates about assimilation because I use that term.
Mm-hmm.
And you've scolded me a few times. But I also, John, what helped me process assimilus to what I do as a Latino empowerment coach is I separate acculturation. I don't want anybody to have to acculturate to a nebulous society, right? But assimilate to how businesses run, the things that help us succeed. Finances, learning how to operate through finances, that kind of thing. That assimilation I don't have a problem with. I don't know how to be white. And it took me 58 years to figure out I don't know how to be white. And I had to stop.
Sure, I do either.
Well,
No,
but
that's
part of it is
absolutely right.
Yeah. Part of the reason why we want to struggle with these things is because we want to say whatever that solved, do we also see what it's not solving? Whatever that, however far that brought us forward, do we see how it's now ill-equipped to help us move now? And all of those kinds of questions. It's not because it was necessarily bad actions. It's that Wesleyan phrase that says going on to perfection. Do we in this moment allow ourselves to learn a little bit more so we take better steps towards what we should be and do? About the rest of you, what success, what do you learn?
My thinking has changed so much. Like, it's not about me personally and my attitudes towards Black folks or brown folks or yellow folks. It's the system in which we all participate, and we're all in it together to try to change that, so that it makes it equity for everybody. And I feel as if this book has like totally reversed my thinking around the moving from the individual to the social system.
Yeah, that's a lot of my stuff too, is so that I don't have to take it personally because it's not fixed, right? Yeah, it's that I'm continue to do it, that it's not It's not just the individual. It's that we're part of this group that's changing things.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So what stands in the way is the obvious other question.
Is Nancy going to share on this point?
Sure. I would say along with what you said is knowing that this is a lifelong process and deciding that I do not have to read everything this year and take every class this year and make sure that things are offered continuously, because it is going to be a lifelong thing. And even like with assuming that maybe this election would have shown us all that the majority of the people think like we do, whatever that is, or even a bigger half than we are looking at. Realizing that we've got a long way to go, and whether we like that or not, that's the way it is, and that's okay.
That's surprisingly sounding like I didn't teach you guys perfectly how to do all this.
One thing that I think is good being a part of this group too is realizing that we need to be supportive of each other, and that this is a good place for us to practice.
Yeah.
Because I think you guys in Tucson were forerunners for these classes, at least in my life. But other places like the church that I attend here in Minnesota kind of has picked up on some of it. And it's a good place to even say, to question other people on what they said. A woman used the term colored when she was talking about some people in class when we were talking. And someone said, I think that's an outdated and now very offensive thing to say. And to realize, I still like you. There's nothing wrong with you, but we're here to improve and to say, like Robin DiAngelo said, to say thanks. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah. I'm not putting you down because you're saying that. I'm just reminding you. And that's good for us, isn't it?
And I think practicing speaking out. I was at Costco, and I don't think I told you guys this. I was at Costco a couple of weeks ago, and they said, "Do you want some holiday stamps?" And I said, "Sure." So I got these holiday stamps, and they're all Coca-Cola white Santa Clauses.
Oh.
And I went back and I said, I changed my mind. I don't want these. And I said, I think in 2020, for me to use these is inappropriate. That I just don't think this is the kind of stamp I want to use. And this guy standing next to me said, what do you mean? Santa Claus is white. And I said, I don't think Santa Claus is white for every person. And he said, but Santa Claus is white. And I said, I don't think every person would agree with you. So anyhow, I don't think a year ago first of all, I wouldn't have even thought sending white Santa Claus stamps was even an issue or something to question. And I sure wouldn't have said anything.
Yeah, nice. And
it's interesting on that. Coca-Cola developed the white Santa for sales in the United States. Coca-Cola Santa in Mexico is not white.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Well, look at
that's
Jesus.
good to hear.
Every country you go to, Jesus is the ethnicity of whatever country you're in. When you're in Africa, Jesus is black.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Of course he is.
Chinese and China too.
I mean, I don't have a problem with a white Santa Claus, though. That's almost like assimilation, I think. And maybe it's because I look like Santa. But, Santa Claus, to me, this brings up a real good point. And that is, Santa Claus to me goes back to Saint Nick and Sinterklaas and European traditions. And just because they're European traditions doesn't mean that they're evil or bad. They're just European. I think, you know, e pluribus unum is a great idea, out of many one. But I think what Letitia, is it Letitia or Leticia?
Way,
Lay.
either way,
Okay. What?
I'm bilingual.
What you said about different cultures, that's what I think America should be. I mean, we've got it on some levels. Did our parents eat Thai food, or, you know, Chinese food was Kung Pao chicken probably. I mean, we've got that. We've got the restaurants down now, but we don't have very much else. And I don't understand the whole what a farmer doesn't know, a farmer doesn't like attitude of fear that people have. To me, when I'm invited to Seder at a Jewish family's house, I love that stuff, you know. And same thing if I'm with Buddhists or anybody else, you know, it's all wonderful. It's all interesting to me.
The hard part, John, is that we often have what I call, and I'm sorry, there's people I'll offend with this. We have West Virginia syndrome. People that have been stuck in this holler, back in the hills, and think that that's the whole world.
Right.
And at least part of all these discussions is trying to figure out how to get out of the holler where I'm at and not be scared of the fact that other people are different there.
Mm-hmm.
And the tough part about that is, John, you earlier mentioned that you like Santa Claus because you look something like me. That's part of the difficulty. We hold on to the things that we like because we're used to them, because they feel like me, because and when some of these other ways of being and acting come out, we have a natural kind of bracing against it. Wait, what do I have to defend myself against? And at least part of anti-racism is essentially putting our hesitations down and allowing that new thing to come in, that it doesn't have to be just my stuff. But that takes some time, doesn't it?
I had a very interesting conversation with a Black gentleman a couple weeks ago, and he's a transplant here from Chicago. He grew up in Chicago. And he said, Letitia, I got to tell you, Tucson has about this much racism in it compared to what he grew up in, right? Sure. But he did point out the white privilege is hard to get around.
So let me share something with you. This is from the end of this chapter. And let me make sure I get the right one here. I think it's this one. And these are some steps he points out that he says this is what we have to do to get past our racism, right? These are the steps we have to go on. And not just to get past our racism, but to step towards anti-racism. So if you look at that, that's kind of the ladder that we're trying to climb. What are some steps there that you've taken? How have you gotten a little further along on that ladder?
Yeah, I liked his thing on page 226. I turned there because I thought that might be what you were going to share.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I meant to tell you that, Judith. That's what I'm talking about, is those steps.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind just reading them out loud. I stopped using I'm not a racist or I can't be racist because he was. I admit the definition of racist. I confess the racist policies. But what was just said, allowing new things in, new thoughts in, that's the hardest thing for me. It's like I'm so such a traditionalist. I want to hang on to the old ways, and
Yeah.
I know that's been the challenge to let go of the old and open myself up to the new across the board, not just about racism, but about a lot of other things. And it fits the COVID thing, you know, like we have to adjust to life on life's terms. I can't keep hanging on to the concerts and the library and the church services that I had. So
I'm going to, if you want me to, I'm going to send these things out to you if you'd like. I've got 3 sheets of paper that I'd love to do sometime today. We'll get to at least 2 of them, and I'll send them to you after class too, so that you can put them on your refrigerator and keep trying to climb the ladder. That's okay.
his steps, his successive steps.
Successive steps, and then later on we'll get to another one that's in the next chapter.
The next, okay.
And I think they're just wonderful ways for us to continually remind ourselves to do the next thing. Because I may, over here where number 4 says, I accept their source, meaning that these racist ideas come from somewhere in my past. Maybe my mom and dad taught them to me. Not trying to be racist, but they just taught me a certain view of the world. Like my mom said, Jim, you really don't want to date a black girl because that will cause some tensions of culture. You don't know her, she doesn't know yours. You're going to have some struggles that way. That's a racist space, right? Not meaning to be horribly racist, but it is one that I have to admit that it came from those who I love. And the good news is I'm trying really hard not to pass on as many of those to my kids.
Diane brings up my father all the time, and it pisses me off when she does this. When we got married, took me aside and took us both aside and said, you know, that he wanted to talk to us about the heartbreak of racism, is the way he phrased it, the heartbreak of racism. And he worried that I didn't know what I was getting into. And, you know, I appreciate that, just like with your mother, but it's racist to think that way, I think.
Yeah.
And I forgive my father for it. I don't think that he did that intentionally.
No, in fact, I think many of the things that got passed on to us sometimes came from a good-hearted space, but also a unknowing space sometimes. And at least part of what this book has taught me is how to make sure that I try not to do the same thing.
Well, and he says inside a nation making us racist. Like it's not even down to our families. It's
not just our family. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, I'd say it goes beyond the nation. I'd say it's culture.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of that definitely we have to figure out what to do with it, right? Oops. Sorry about that.
I don't think the segregationist attitude ever left this country.
Oh, no, not completely. I mean, that's part
you're
of what
right.
That's the hardest thing. Is
Especially
what I
in neighborhoods.
with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up with all the cultures in Tucson here when it was small, like under 50,000. They were separatists. They all stayed with their own culture, but they were not segregationists. When it came out to working with and for the community, they all worked together. Whites, Hispanics, Blacks, Asians.
Yeah. But just think about the statement by our soon-to-be ex-president.
We hope.
Who talked about, you know, he's protecting the suburbs.
Oh yeah, no, that was
right.
That was good.
He's
David Wilkinson once said something that really was upsetting to me, and I confronted him on it. And it was, you know, I'd gone through this as a real estate agent. Most of my clients when I started were on the South Side, and that's a great story. But he said something about feeling sorry for all of those poor souls that have to live on the South Side. And, you know, that was just racist as heck, because the people that I knew liked living in there. You know, if you're a Spanish speaking person, you like living around people that speak Spanish.
Right.
You know, that doesn't, you know, so the barrio isn't necessarily the ghetto. But that's how it was perceived by him. That's how it was perceived by a lot of my fellow real estate agents. And so I think what Letitia said was true. I think that Tucson, you know, it's like when I grew up in Baltimore, there was the Polish part of town and there was the Jewish part of town, and there were different parts of town. And they weren't all necessarily ghettos. But you don't want to be stuck in that. And that's where the rubber meets the road.
That's right. And how am I ensuring that the Hispanic part of town isn't underserviced?
Right.
Looked down on, you know.
John, as a realtor, you could agree too. The whites would come in because the Hispanics don't manicure their lawns the same way, right? Their yards the same way. They go, oh, it's kind of rough neighborhood, right? And
No.
I've told the group here, a lot of those homes, a lot of the women on the north side of town would die for the kitchens that those husbands put together for their wives.
Well, that's right. It's, you know, it's, and I don't want this to be misunderstood, but it reminded me a little bit of Russia. When you go to Russia, these places that you visit when you're staying at people's homes, you know, they have all these locks on the door and you think, my God, you know, this, what are they smoking crack here? And then you go into the apartment or the house and it's just gorgeous. And that happens all the time on the South, not just the South side, but with Latino families all over Tucson. You know, the inside, you know, the inside of the house, you walk in and it's a palace. And yeah, that's very true.
See, but if we have decided in our head that certain ways of using money or certain ways of spending time or certain ways of doing whatever are the right ways, then it's easy for us to be racist or sexist or whatever, right? That makes it easy for those types of thoughts to creep into our head and the actions that go along with them. That's why one of the things that I loved about this is he pushed not just for us to drop our racism, but for us to actively and continually be anti-racist. What in this moment is perpetuating something, and to move into that space. So what steps are you taking to eliminate racism, injustice, somehow the prejudice that has surrounded us? How are you helping to eliminate that in your space? Because, for example, let's all take Nancy, because we can fix Tucson down here, but we don't have as much ability to help Minnesota. So we're going to have to trust on Nancy to fix all of the state of Minnesota. Right? And that's what we have to do. The people in Philadelphia have to trust us in Tucson. The people in San Francisco have to trust the people in Philadelphia. And sometimes we can work together to do some of those things, but we have to figure out how to take on what it is that we can take on. So I'm going to show you another page here. This comes from page 233, Judith, in your book.
Thank you.
Here it is. These are 11 different points that he makes about ways that we can eliminate racial inequality. I want you to kind of read through those different points. And first of all, pick one that you think, I'm still not great at that. So I'm going to work on that. No, let's do it the other way. Let's work on success first. Which one of these are you doing pretty well at? And then later we'll pick on one of them that you want to improve on. And again, I'll send a copy of this out to you afterwards. So you've got this to look at. How many found one that you're doing all right on?
Well, the first sentence and the second from the last, when policies fail, don't blame the people. I think I can do that.
Good.
But I don't think I have the energy to start over and seek out new and more effective anti-racist treatments until they work.
But here's the good news, Judith. At least you figured out in here that blaming policies, not people, is a good thing. That's an amazing thing to be able to figure out, because we do a lot of blaming people.
Yes, I did before I read this book.
Yeah. How about the rest of you? What's one that you're doing pretty well on?
I'm doing well on one.
Yeah.
I've been going through a lot lately because of what's been going on in our country with the election. And it's very concerning to me, the hatred that I'm hearing from the Democrats. Someone in our church was saying basically that Trump and his followers are Nazis. I have a guy that I work with, or that's in my blog group, who says Trump and his followers are stupid. And all of those ideas are not, in my opinion, first of all, productive, but they're not true. I think that people are uninformed. I think that I really believe that most people are good in their heart. I think if somebody sees you broken down on the side of the road, they're probably going to help you and not rob you, which other people would tell me is naive, but I believe that. Mm-hmm. And I know lots of people that are conservative, racist assholes that, are children of God. And I can talk to, you find common ground, you can talk to them about music, you can talk to them about something.
Right.
And hopefully then you can have an impact. I think that the greatest impact I can have is just one-on-one with people. And it's really hard for me not to be confrontational. And it's really hard for me not to do what I'm doing right now and be pedantic. But and also it's hard for me not to use words like pedantic. So I've got a lot that I'm working on.
Well, and that's the next question, of course, is which ones of these things are you working on? So those two that haven't given you what you're doing okay so far, you can go ahead and do that, or you can do like John and already skip to the second question. Which of these are inside of what this class is calling you into?
Like I said in Tuesday's class, I'm going back to my political connections. John, I don't think you've heard it. I'm more of a centrist.
I've never heard that.
Yeah.
Radical centrist, I've heard you say.
Radical centrist, Judith remembers. So I have a conservative bent, but I also have a very socialist bent to me as well. So my path through the political process, my first time I voted was in 1982.
Wow.
He's a child, huh?
Yeah. And I came out of a Catholic education, which now would be extremely conservative, but I was raised by Kennedy Democrats. So I get lambasted for wanting to be fiscally conservative and socially liberal. And so my whole big thing in the past, I did a lot of work with a number of the chambers in Tucson. I was gone for 20 years, just recently back in the last 3 years. So I'm getting ready to jump back in the fray because I do have those relationships with at least local policymakers.
Right.
And it's
Thank
a
you,
matter of
Leticia. And what we want you to know, and I'm speaking for this group as well as others, help us to be partners with you, because, you know, any of that type of trail into politics is not as simply done as a one-person job.
It took me a long time. I was playing in that field in my late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
But I had children that I didn't want exposed to it.
Yeah.
So now I'm finishing up my degree. Should be done in about a year to 18 months, and then I'll single old lady. I get to do what I want.
There you go. How about the rest of you? What are you doing? Which one of these is your step to your space to improve the issue? For me, part of it is number 5, figure out who or what group has the power to institute anti-racist policy. And I've always kind of tried to do that, but I've realized that in some of that, I've been lax because of just busyness, right? Regina, for example, has been a friend almost since the first of when I came here to Tucson. We've known each other that whole time. Now she's mayor, and I realized that I've done very little to keep that relationship connected. Right? We've worked on a lot of things together. She's very open to having me talk to her, but I've realized I haven't really done that talking. I haven't done that supporting. And so that's at least one place that I have to step into, because she does have the power to institute things. Right? And the difficulty of instituting it.
Leticia, how are you getting along with Raul?
Oh, I've never got along with Raul.
Yeah, I know you said you hadn't. So
But my biggest problem with Raul, he somewhat can fall into the institutional racism. And he utilizes it as a political tool at times. And rather than looking at the overall, especially when he was superintendent, rather than looking at the overall concern and looking at illiteracy rates and dropout rates just climbing across the board, he always made it a Latino issue, right? And that kind of position and that political position and that position in children's education does nothing to bring this community together.
Yeah. The hard part is having to work with anybody in the spaces they're in, right? And I don't mean even somebody like Raul, who will be more sympathetic in some ways to what we're talking about. It's how do I talk to somebody who is possibly very unsympathetic, but still try to help them to be on the same page. I remember going to talk with Martha McSally before she closed herself down more and more. And at least we were there trying to have that conversation. It was PCIC that set that up. And whether or not we like the person, the position, we should honor and try to find ways that that position can help.
What I find difficult is when somebody crosses from an attempt to be a servant leader into full-blown politician.
I know, that's hard. That's hard. That is a difficult thing. And I understand even why it happens, because to be effective in those spaces, you have to view the world very differently than how we get to view the world outside here. It's a dysfunction of the space, but it may also be a necessary tool of the space.
John, the other thing, I worked as an escrow officer, both real estate or residential and commercial for over 30 years.
Yeah. And I was thinking when you were talking about teaching Hispanics about finance, that was something that I spent my life trying to do because of culture. I'll never forget the first time that I had a client and he was making $50,000 a year and had good income and good debt ratios and everything. And then we ran his credit and he had 2 car repossessions on his credit report, which of course destroys your credit report. And I said, what the heck is this about? And he said, oh, those aren't mine. That was my nephew and my cousin. And I said, what? And, recently we ran into a little bit of a personal problem with our finances. And my loan officer said, well, I run into this situation more on the South side than I usually do with gringos. And so that's really difficult, teaching people that you want to help your family, but you don't want to destroy your credit. And that happened a lot. It's just like the statistics on savings among people of color being so much lower. And I don't want to sound racist, but I've known lots of people that, go from paycheck to paycheck. And when they get a good paycheck, then they can go out and, have dinner at Red Lobster or something. So I don't know how you teach that. I don't know how you teach that. But
what happens in Latino families, if you have a little bit and somebody's hurting, a cousin, an aunt, or whatever, the money goes there, and it just, they don't think in savings. They think in terms of helping their family when they can. And it goes round and round in the families. That's cultural. But no, what I was saying as an escrow officer, what I had to do as an escrow officer, I had to stay neutral all the time between the realtors, the buyers, the sellers, the attorneys, the lenders. And that's a skill, Jim, that I bring to wanting to get involved politically.
That's right. Some people fail miserably at politics. Sometimes it's because they are so busy beating other people over the head about what they're doing wrong that they don't have the political acumen to actually speak in those spaces. I'm not saying that's a wrong thing to do, but that's better as a better tool as an activist than as a politician, right? So sometimes what Regina needs is an activist to be able to do some of the things that she as a politician can't do as easily or as well, right? And it's that type of thing we have to figure out is what is my role? What kind of person am I? What are the skills that I bring into it so that I take the roles that I can and I connect to the people that I need in order to get things done.
And I'm guilty of that. I was a politics major as an undergraduate, and I'm still guilty of it. I condemned Biden because he was a drug czar. I condemned Kamala Harris because she put 2,000 people in prison for marijuana. And that's wrong of me because they're politicians. And so, you know, she was doing her job, and so was Biden, as my wife has pointed out. But the problem is, where does that stop? You know, people were doing their job in Nazi Germany.
Right.
So where does that stop? Someplace you've got to let ethics trump reality.
Right. Well, think of it this way, John. When I showed you, on that last thing that I showed you, the steps to eliminate racial inequality, when I was typing it and when I first read it back, I kept trying to see where it said, teach a class so you fix all the people at St. Francis so that they have racism figured out perfectly. And it's not on there. Damn it. That's what I'm doing. I'm trying to fix it that way. And part of what his thing is here is all about policy. How am I involved in policy?
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing. Changing you, John, as much as you might need to be changed, is not what fixes racial inequality.
No.
It's how do we help each other to step into policy. However, and it doesn't mean we all have to do the same thing. For some of us, it could be, I know my county supervisor well, and I continue to talk to that person. For some people, it might be, I go down and lobby down at the state legislature. Whatever it is that you do, that's what you've got to figure out your role. It might be running for an office, right? But running for office isn't
it might be somewhere in between.
It might be somewhere in between. There's a million ways to do it. It could just be talking to your grocery store manager that puts something up that seems less than acceptable to you. And so you make sure that they understand whatever it was that happened.
But that's so hard to do, Jim. I'm not going to name names, but one of the members of a church singing group that I'm involved with was wearing an All Lives Matter t-shirt, and I didn't confront him on it. And I have had that same issue come up with one of my sons-in-law. And I don't know, sometimes things are so complicated that in order for you to explain to somebody why all lives matter is not expressing what they think it's expressing, you know, that requires a dialogue and also a willingness to be analytical that a lot of people just don't want to deal with that.
Oh, I get that completely. You can't judge yourself by anybody else's actions. You have to say, in this moment, do I have the ability, the strength, the endurance to take on whatever this task asks of me? And somebody else might say, of course I do. I'm going to go for it. But you at that moment may know that it's a 10-minute job and you only have 5 minutes. And
right.
Sometimes to do something in 5 minutes that should take longer hurts it more than helps it. And so you have to decide those kinds of things.
Well, I've been a salesman all my life, and one of our many sayings is, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And you're very good at that, Jim. And I am good at it when I'm a salesperson, but not in my day-to-day life. It's very hard for me not, we had that conversation where I said, all drugs should be legalized. And I am very grateful that we legalized marijuana. I don't like the way that the law is written, but at least it's a step towards social justice. And so when I say to people, all drugs should be legalized, their initial impression is that I must want to go out and smoke crack cocaine and shoot heroin. And of course, that's not what I'm saying. So I think that's what you're so good at, Jim. And I give you a lot of credit.
I just think it takes a longer time than what any particular conversation will take, right?
Right.
So you have to not judge yourself by, damn, I didn't fix him this time. You know, it's okay to take the relationship rather than the conversation to be the fixing point.
And John, what I've learned from Jim, I was introduced into St. Francis. And the relationship with the person that I was introduced to St. Francis with faded. So I chose to have a conversation with Jim, and the classes and getting to know people and the sidebar conversations that are happening. It takes a community to
Right.
build up every person that has a skill to help.
Mhm.
And so I just sent you a note if you haven't read it.
Where?
Um,
It's
I
on.
sent a note in the chat. You go down to the chat box and you'll see a little red dot where it says chat on the bottom
Oh, I see more.
under your screen.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
And not be afraid to reach out and continue these conversations that we're having in these classes.
that's right. That is a lot of it. Is where do we continue to have conversations that continue what's happening here, and not just with each other. How do you do that with your neighbor next door, who you haven't had these kinds of talks with before? Not because they're racist or not racist, but because you just haven't had these conversations. You know, and you just ask something like, what do you think about all this stuff going on these days? And you begin that conversation somehow. You might find that they're very involved in something that you can get involved in, or that they're very energetic and want to get involved in something that you talk about.
They want to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
I
another.
got a friend that said I'd talk about this stuff to the dogs on the street if I could.
There's two things I want to share with you. First of all, let me share one more picture with you. One more piece of the book. Judith, this comes from way near the end, page 237, 238, okay? You know, he talks about racism and treating racism the way he treats cancer, and I like that.
Yes, I like the analogy because I could understand that.
Yeah, I appreciate it a lot after all the stuff we've gone through with Joni this year.
Joni, yes.
And all of these things that he puts here that we have to continue to do. Very metaphoric ways to do it. Remove any remaining racist policies. You know, how do I do that? Well, I work with the legislature. I work with the city council. I work with to try to do that. How do I continue to detect and treat a recurrence early before it can grow? Well, when I hear a kid saying something, or I hear a parent telling their kid something, I step into that space, right? That's a good thing. But here's what I really want you to see. Down at the bottom, it says this: before we treat, we must believe. We have to believe that all is not lost for you or me or our society. Isn't that a great thing? Because in the middle of all this, as we see all this stuff where it feels like we took such steps backwards in the last little while, we have to remember that even these steps don't say that racism has got the upper hand. It's not lost. We can continue going. Believe in the possibility that we can strive to be anti-racist from this day forward. Even if we were horrible yesterday, today we can be different. And then the third one is that we can continue to transform our societies to be anti-racist.
Mm.
This is one of the things I'm going to send out to you. And this one right here is one of the things that would be really good to put on your refrigerator, just to remind yourself, just to read again and again, to go back to and say, okay, keep going, keep trying. Because in the midst of whatever it is that's less than perfect, we have to remember that we have power still. And I don't mean that just in the singular we. I mean in all the different ways that we are connected. You have power in your family, and your family has power in, right? You have power in your community, and our community has power to change things here. We have to remember that. He said in 238, one other thing. He said 4 sentences that I just love. Racist power is not godly. No matter how much we try to almost act like it is eternal and immortal, it is not. Racist policies, he says, are not indestructible. No matter how difficult they are sometimes to expunge from our minds or our communities. Racial inequalities are not inevitable. We do not have to have those inequalities. We can change them. Racist ideas are not natural to the human world. But we have to start teaching ourselves differently, and not just us, but all the people around us, about what we have to expect from each other. The good news is while you still haven't quite fixed all the racial problems in the world, I feel like we've taken some good steps, haven't we? Thank you for your time with me for this book. We're going to take a couple weeks off, and then starting in
December?
In Advent. It's going to be just before December starts. The first Sunday of Advent is the 29th, I think it is. We are going to begin looking at Maya Angelou's poetry. And we're going to follow this little thing that somebody wrote, Maya Angelou and the Freedom Poetry of Advent. We're going to look at that for 4 weeks, and I will get the booklets out to you. You'll be able to see how we're going to do it, but I'd love to have you be part of those discussions. All right. Did I hear somebody going to say something? All right. Thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you for doing this. And thanks for letting us
John,
join.
please feel free to reach out.
I'll call you.
Thanks.
All right. Take care, friends.
Will that still be up here? I better write that down or do something with it.
Which one?
The chat.
I gave him some contact information on the chat, so he has to write it down.
Let me go get a pen or something.
John.
Yeah.
Take your mouse, highlight it all, do a Control-C.
Now I'm on an iPad.
Oh. Then what you can usually do is hold your finger down by it. A thing will come up that says copy, paste, select all. Push select all, and then do it, and then hold your finger down again, and you can copy it and put it into a document or something. Or you can get a pencil.
Or I can just get a pencil and write down a telephone number, which is what I just did. So I'm okay.
All right. You're stuck in the 60s a bit, but we already knew that about you.
Yeah. All right. You guys have a good day.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.